So here we are for another episode of RC Pit Stop, and today we have the HPI Vorza S Truggy, which has been in retirement for a little while. I haven't used this Truggy in a long time, and as you can see by the dust built up on this thing, it's been sitting on the shelf for I think probably close to a year, maybe more, and hasn't really seen a lot of use. But thankfully, Draco has come to the rescue here, and they've actually contacted me and sent out a bunch of goodies for me to put on this Truggy, which is going to give me a great excuse to take it out again and have some fun with it. I just can't bring myself to get rid of it. I've held on to it for quite some time, and because I really do like this Truggy. But hopefully now with the upgrades, it's not only going to be even better than what it was, but it's going to perform a lot better as well. Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. So let's get into this because there is quite a bit to cover off here. First and foremost, we're going to start off with these Draco parts that were sent over to me. We've got some shock towers here. There's a front and rear shock tower. I'll give you a quick glimpse of what these things look like, and then we'll go over them in a little bit more detail. But you can see the quality of work that's gone into these. That's the rear one. We have the front one over here. There's also some hardware, like screws and some washers and stuff to help me put these on. I think those might be for the camber links. I think that's what they're for. This is the front one. Absolutely gorgeous, beautiful craftsmanship. So we'll get those out of the way. We've got some front and rear chassis braces here. We've got a tiny little one for the front. So the front only has this tiny little fella right there. And we have the rear one, which I almost dropped, which is this guy. And again, beautiful craftsmanship on this. They're finished so nice. It's going to be a shame to get these things dirty and to get them all banged up, but you know, that's what they're for. Now we do have a motor mount here, and there's some bits and pieces in here we'll go through very quickly. First and foremost, the motor mount itself. Look how gorgeous that is, the way that fits together. Just beautiful. And you've got an M3 and an M4 screw holes for your motors as well, so should fit a variety of different motors on that. We have the diff support, the center diff support on the opposite side. That's what that guy is there. And then we have this, which goes on top. This kind of sits on top, and there's some other bits in here that we'll show you in a second. So they've also given me some hardware as well to screw all of that on. And then I think this is a like a pinion gear cover. I think that's what that's for. So that goes there. And then last but not least, we have a chassis brace. Now this is really interesting. There are instructions for this that they've sent for me as well, so I'll show you those in a second. Got some hardware here as well. And then this is the brace itself. This I believe is the front one, and this is the rear one. And that looks really beefy. If the camera would focus, there we go. So it looks very nice. And these are obviously adjustable to an extent, so to make sure that the chassis stays nice and straight. Now he's given me some instructions. These are just some printouts. Also got some stickers on here, which I'll be able to put them somewhere at some stage. There is a separate printout that I have to do for the shock towers. This is the one that came with everything, but I believe that there may be some information missing from here or inaccurate, but everything else should be okay. You know, we've got our chassis brace there. We've got a bunch of other stuff. So the motor mount, this is what that top piece is going to be for. So you can see the top piece there is going to be mounted in there like so. And then the chassis brace, which I believe is this last one that I've got just here, that is going to look like that. And that is what that piece is going to support, is the actual chassis braces there. So this I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it's going to fit on the truck, because it's something that the truck currently doesn't have, which is a tower-to-tower brace or any type of like extra chassis bracing. So we are also going to be upgrading the servo. We're going to go with a Savox. Now this is a high voltage 8.4 volt. This is the 1268 SG. Now unfortunately I don't have an ESC that will go to 8.4 volts. Or at least I don't have one that's available for this particular car at the moment. I may look into that a little bit later on. But at 7.4 it'll give me 25 kilos of torque with a 0.11 speed, which I think will be ample. Now the stock ESC won't allow me to adjust the BEC to 7.4. It's going to be running at 6 volts. So we're going to be swapping out the ESC. I've got an Max 8 ESC. This came out of my Creighton, I think it was a V4 Creighton that I recently sold, and I had these extended leads so that it would go around and stuff. So I'll cut them off and shorten this up again, and we'll be fitting that in here. I think I'm going to keep the stock radio with this car. I'm not going to swap out the stock radio for the moment because I actually do like the stock radio. It's one of the few RTR radios that are actually so well equipped and perform so well that I'm actually going to be keeping it. So there's a lot to get to here. Let's get to work. Let's start wrenching, and then I'll come back. We'll do a stage by stage thing like we always do, and hopefully we'll have a beautifully clean and finished Truggy with all these beautiful Draco upgrades installed on it. So as you can see, I've actually removed the front shock tower here. I've still got some of the screws hanging off it, so I've got to be careful not to sort of lose them and lose their position. And one of the things I noticed, which I hadn't noticed up until this point, is just how much bigger the new shock tower is. And I got to be honest, I had to kind of like do a double take, and I'm like, have I got the right shock tower? What's going on? But I mean, the new one just dwarfs it. It's almost twice the thickness, as you can see there. And you know what? Despite my tumbles and the amount of punishment I've put this truck through, or this Truggy, the stock shock tower actually hasn't done too bad, but it does have a slight bend on this here. You might be able to pick it up on camera. There is a slight sort of tilt forward, but aside from that, it actually has held up reasonably well. Of course, the new one is going to do a much better job. It's just an absolute monster of a shock tower, and as you can see, it's got the holes here for that tower to tower brace. It's got way more adjustments for your shocks, so you can play around with the geometry of the suspension a lot more, and of course it's going to be a lot more durable than the original one. So let's see. Actually, I haven't tested it to make sure it fits, but there you go. Fits 100% perfect. Just got to put the screws in, start putting the shocks back on, and this one will be done. And there we have it. Front shock tower is on. Pretty straightforward swap, nothing too complex. There were 4 screws here that bolt onto the bulkhead. You got to be careful with these screws. These are self-tapping screws, which I find really weird that HPI have actually decided to use self-tapping screws here. So don't over tighten them or you will strip out the plastic. Be very mindful of that when you're putting them back in. But there are 2 screws just here behind the shock tower for the front bumper, and then 2 screws underneath as well, and the whole front bumper comes out. You need to take this out because accessing these is a little bit tricky. You can probably get away without removing this, but I mean, for 2 extra screws, you may as well just take that out. I also mounted up the body posts, so I had to take them off the original shock tower, and then mounted up my shocks and everything. I've left this in the stock position that these came in, but again, we may adjust this depending on how the front sits and everything. Once I get the body on and I get the tires back on and everything, we'll see how it all looks. But that's stage 1 done. Really straightforward swap, nothing really to worry about here. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so my rear shock tower is on, and very much like the front shock tower, I had to replace the body posts. The new screws come for the actual links themselves. I've put them in a position that I think is right, but we may end up having to change that once the wheels go on and we check cambers and all that sort of thing. I may need to change that. Now, I did do one adjustment, and that was the position of the standoffs on the shock tower. They come on this hole right here, the middle hole, if I can show you, comes in that one as standard out of the packet. I moved it down 1, and the reason for that was because when I was putting my shocks on, I had to lift the arm for the shock to actually go on to the standoff. And if I did that and left it as is, well, I would have, I could have adjusted my droop screw to make sure that the shock is not overextending. But because I'm actually going to be using this as a basher and I'm going to be doing some big jumps, I want as much droop as possible. I want as much travel on that arm as possible. So I moved the shock position down one on the shock tower. Depending on what you're going to be setting this up for, whether it's a racetrack, whether you're just going to be doing, oval bashing, you're not going to need to really have a lot of travel. You may adjust that to a completely different position or leave it as is, as it came. So it's entirely up to you. So that's the shock towers done. Very straightforward swap. Again, just a word of caution here. These screws that are here, this one, and those two on the other side, they are self-tapping screws onto plastic. Make sure when you put those back on, you're putting them on by hand. You can take them off with a power tool, something like that. But when putting them back in, just be very careful. Otherwise, if you over tighten them, you are likely to strip them on the plastic, and then you got to replace the entire bulkhead. So I don't know why HPI have done them as self-tapping. Everything else seems to be machine screws, but yeah, just a word of caution there. And then, yeah, we're ready to go. So now we can move on to the center of the truck, and eventually we'll get to the electronics as well. Right, so quick progress update. As you can see, I've removed the center diff because it just made life a little easier to install the front and rear shock towers, which are currently mounted up. As you can see there, these fit beautifully. You will need to reuse your existing hardware, so nuts and bolts here, nuts and your screws back here as well, and same with the front one. Just reuse the screw, put a little bit of Loctite on that one, and then just reuse the nut and bolt there. Now, the original screw that goes on the bottom here is a little bit longer than I would like. It kind of sticks out a little bit. This is the one that comes out or comes stock in the car, if my camera would focus, which I think is a 14 mil from memory. And I've opted for just a slightly shorter one, just so it doesn't stick out too much, because it looked a bit weird sticking out a little bit. The rear one here wasn't so much of an issue. That one is the right size. But I will say I had a hell of a time taking it out of the plastic brace. It was proper welded in there. Normally you just put the screw back in and just give it a love tap and the whole thing just pops out. I gotta be honest, I was about to hire a jackhammer and a flamethrower to try and get this thing out of here, because yeah, I had to hammer it pretty hard. And as you can see, I've created some damage on the on the chassis brace because of that. But eventually got it out. I don't know why it was so well stuck in there, and yeah, bolted on. So I've got the diff out. I'm gonna do that next, and probably do the motor mount at the same time. So that's the next phase, and then I'll come back and report back to how that's going, and then we'll do the chassis brace as the last step. So a bit more progress has been made. You can see the motor mount and center diff mount has been installed, and I gotta say, the way that this all fits together, it is just so nice. And I know that like Draco sent this out to me and everything, and I'm not trying to sort of like pump up their tires or anything. I'm just trying to give you guys some honest feedback, because there is something about working on RCs when you get upgraded parts that just work and they just fit and everything just clicks into place. It makes working on the RC that much easier, right? It's not just about putting an upgrade, maybe you get some alloy knuckles or something, like whatever it is you're installing. It's not just about that part being fitted to your car, but also how it fits, how it gets mounted on, and how everything just sort of seems to work. And for a third-party company to be doing this and being so precise, I'm really impressed so far. I'm hoping that the tower-to-tower brace, which is I think going to be the final part of this puzzle here as far as the hardware goes, until we get to the servo and ESC, I hope that that goes pretty seamless as well and very easy. But so far, I gotta say, everything fits very, very nicely. I have no complaints about this. I mean, anyone that's worked on any RC to any capacity is going to absolutely love these, and they're going to appreciate just how well these things go together. So at the start of the video, I said that there was a little plastic piece that I thought was like a gear cover or something. Well, it's not. I think it's actually better than that. It actually goes on the back here of your motor. You can see it there, and it uses two existing holes, and you can use the existing screws that you had to actually mount the original motor mount. And all it is, it's just a support for your motor. So when you're doing jumps and things like that, you're not flexing on this motor mount. The motor is actually supported on the back, and you can slide that in and out accordingly. Mine basically, you screw it in a little bit, push it hard up against the motor and tighten it up, and that gives it a little bit of support. Hopefully it's useful and it does its job, but I think that's actually a really clever idea. And yeah, props to Draco for supplying that one. I did not expect that at all, so very impressed. So one last little update before we go onto the electrics. You can see the tower-to-tower bracing has been fitted, and just like all the other parts, this has been very much a flawless install. The rear brace went on first. I put the little brackets on the back here, mounted it up, and then when I went to put the screw in, it literally just dropped straight in. Didn't have to adjust the length or do anything. Just a beautiful, beautiful fitment on this rear brace. The front brace was very much the same. However, I did have to squeeze the front shock tower back just a tiny little bit, like put just a little bit of pressure to allow that screw to fall into place, which is also a testament to how good the chassis has been after the several bash sessions that I've had with this thing, both on and off camera. This truck has taken quite a fair bit of abuse, and of course now it's going to be even better with all these upgrades, so I shouldn't have any worries with chassis bending or anything like that. Especially the shock towers should stay nice and straight, which should also help protect the body. So for now, I'm going to leave this here. I'm going to go and replace the servo and the ESC. I also need to reinstall my battery tray, which I removed to make sort of installing all of this stuff a little bit easier. And then yeah, the next time you see this car will be fully finished, and I'll run you through, just give you a bit of a brief overview of everything, and just note a couple of little criticisms, very small stuff, just in regards to this whole install, because as I said, throughout this entire process, it's been really, really good. The parts have fitted beautifully and they look fantastic. So let's get these electrics fitted, and then we'll wrap this up. So there we have it. The HPI Vorza S Truggy is now complete with all the upgrades, and it's ready to hit the track. But before we actually finish this off, I do want to kind of do a bit of a quick debrief on this entire install and go over a couple of things, just so that you're fully aware of everything that I had to sort of deal with, and if there's any little tricky areas that you need to know about. I mean, for the most part, this whole thing went very seamless, but there are a couple of little things here that I want to point out. Now, first off, the body, although this was not part of the upgrade, it does have a little bit of a mod done to it. First off, when I was putting the body on after I'd finished everything, I realized that the body posts didn't line up. So these were too far forward, which means that the chassis was sort of not 100% flat, maybe. Although the tower-to-tower braces fitted on very easily and they were pretty much the right size to how the chassis was, it's possible that maybe the chassis had a slight bend in it, or because we now have thicker shock towers as well, the shock towers may have moved the body posts inwards a little bit, and I've just had to do a minor adjustment on the tower-to-tower braces to open up the chassis and allow the body to sit in there properly. To my knowledge, the chassis didn't look bent, but that's not to say it didn't have a slight curve to it. And of course that becomes evident, as you move upwards. You can see it in the body post there, especially with this body. And I'm glad I've got this relatively new body on here that doesn't have any stretched holes or anything like that, or any major damage, because that really showed me exactly what adjustments I needed to do. So that was very simple, and thankfully those tower-to-tower braces are really easy to adjust. The other thing you need to do, you might actually see this back here, where I had to do a little bit of a cutout to clear the standoff screws on both corners of the shock tower there. Just a minor thing. I mean, most of us will have some scissors or maybe a Dremel or something to cut that out. And then obviously that'll clear your screws there, and away you go. I did also trim a little bit where the shock tower is, because the body was kind of rubbing on the shock tower, so I did clear a little bit of that. But that's really it as far as you know, the body is concerned in fitting on this particular Truggy with all the mods. Moving on to the mods themselves, this is what this guy looks like now. It looks really nice and clean. I love these Draco emblems everywhere, and I love the way that this fits and looks. It just looks so good, and it's so clean, and I absolutely love it. I can't wait to run this thing. I mean, it looks almost too good to get dirty, but you know, we have to do what we have to do. All right, so let's start with these tower-to-tower braces, because these were actually one of the last things I installed. We'd start with them first. So as I said, I had to adjust them a little bit. Thankfully, adjusting these is very easy. They've got these little holes here. The big one's got one there as well, and you basically just turn the rod either one way or the other, and you're either going to tighten them up or you're going to widen them out a little bit. So I just did a couple of turns on each, and that lined up my body posts, and away we went. Moving on to the mounting of these tower braces, you'll see that you've got 4 screws here on the front. These hold these 2 little mounts that you see here, and then the bolt goes through, and you have a bolt that goes through on this center diff mount as well, and away you go. Again, I'm going to say use, if I haven't said this enough throughout the video, use some Loctite whenever you're screwing into aluminium. You don't need to do it on plastic. In fact, a lot of people would say that if you did it on plastic, it may actually harm the plastic. Although there are some Loctites now that you probably can use. Ideally, in aluminium, anything you're screwing into metal, you want to use just a drop of Loctite just to make sure it doesn't back out. One thing to note about these 4 screws for these mounts, they're a little bit soft, and I have told Draco this, and they're going to be looking at replacing these in future shipments to something of a harder steel, harder metal. I use MIP and Huddy tools, so I'm not using cheap tools, and although I could just sort of like finger tighten them on, when I went to sort of give them like a half a turn crank to really torque them into place, I could feel the bit almost stripping out the head. They're tight enough. I think they'll do for the job that they have to do. But for those of you out there who get one of these, if you find that these screws are a little bit soft, just maybe swap them out, or at the very least, make sure you use a good quality tool so that you're not, you know, stripping out these heads too easily. Because if you strip them as you're cranking them on, you're not going to have a great day trying to take them out, especially if you use some Loctite in there. So just something to keep in mind there. Everything else on the install went pretty well. I didn't have any issues with the center diff mount. This was flawless. The rear chassis brace was awesome. I used the stock screw to bolt that in. The front brace, I think I mentioned that I used a slightly shorter screw, just because the stock screw was sticking out a little bit too much. I did use the stock screw for that top one there, and the stock screws for the diff mount here as well. These were all the screws that were provided. Drop a Loctite in all of them, bolted that on, no problems at all. I mean, once you crank this into place, this is rigid as, it's not going anywhere. The motor mount, rather, super easy to adjust, moves up and down really nice, but it's nice and firm. It's not super loose either. So the tolerances are actually very, very good. I love the little touch of the little motor support on the back. I think that's fantastic. Savox Servo went in very, very easy as well. This guy just bolted straight in there with no problems at all. Now these black edition servos, I don't know if you can see, but the cable is all black. There's no red, white and black cable coming out of this. It's all in black, which looks really good. Aluminium servo horn, I got this out of my spares box with all the bits. I think I got this from AliExpress or somewhere, but you know, it's just an alloy servo horn. You can get them from hobby shops, you can get them from anywhere. The ESC, the stock ESC mount that these cars come with actually come with the holes to bolt onto the back of your Hobby Wing ESCs, like a Max 8 or a standard 150 amp ESC. So rather than putting double-sided tape on this guy, I actually have 4 screws holding it in place, and then there are 2 screws from the actual ESC mount that are mounted onto the chassis itself, and this guy is not going anywhere. And then I've got my on and off switch just mounted straight onto the chassis just there. I gave that a little bit of a clean with some alcohol, and that shouldn't be coming out anytime soon. Got my battery in here, got the Hobby King Rapid battery. That's a 4S, which I think, if I remember correctly, this thing on 4S is a bit of an animal. On 6S is just insane. So I'm probably going to be running this on 4S for the most part. But of course, now that we've got all this bracing, we have to test it out on 6S as well, especially with this servo, which I'll show you how quick this is now. Running at 7.4 volts on the BEC, this thing is very, very quick. The front shock tower, this is the last one that we're going to be mentioning here. For those of you with a keen eye, you may notice that I actually have 2 different color screws here, or nuts. So the black nut is the stock one. This one here is the one that I've had to replace it with. And you know, this is probably reviewer's curse. I know that not only myself, but a lot of other content creators out there will come across situations like this where you're reviewing a product and there's always something that's missing, there's something that's bent or something, whatever. And for me, it was a standoff that had a damaged thread. Now, I don't know if it was the actual nut itself, because that's got a damaged internal thread. I don't know if it was this that damaged that thread, or if it was that thread that was damaged that stripped out the nut, because I couldn't tighten it. And I only found this out because I kind of put the shock on and then I had to take it off for some reason. And when I tried to take it off, it undid this one. So then I eventually took it out and I thought, oh, let me tighten this up. So then I had a pair of pliers on the standoff and I went to tighten this and it just kept spinning. It never got to the point where I was like cranking on it and then stripped it. It never tightened. So yeah, it was damaged and I took this out. I've put a fresh nut in there. It looks like it's going to hold okay because that doesn't have a damaged thread, but I didn't crank on it too much. And although Draco, you know, I told Draco about this and they did offer to send out a new standoff, I think it's going to hold okay. I think it'll be fine, but if it's not, and if this does happen to you, I'm sure that they will be more than willing to sort you out and send out a replacement. So that's pretty much it. I think I've covered everything. Overall, the install, I'll probably give it, I don't know, like a 9.5 out of 10. Honestly, there's really not a lot here for me to complain about. There was, you know, I had a bit of bad luck with that. Yes, these screws are not great, but it looks like they're going to be fixing those up. But everything just fitted so nicely. Like, this is the thing that I was most impressed with, was that it was, even after I had used the car for so long, and you know, you're expecting tolerances not to be as good, and yet they were. And I think it's a praise to Draco for the quality of product that they're putting out, but also a praise to HPI, because I have beaten the snot out of this car and everything is still holding up. And even after putting all these upgrades on there, you know, nothing's out of whack, and I didn't have to replace any plastic parts to make all of this work, and it's all fine. There is one thing which I think I mentioned earlier in the video, is that these shock towers are all bolted with 4 screws to the bulkheads with self-tapping screws. So you can use a drill to take the screws out, but I highly recommend you put them back in by hand so you don't over crank them and accidentally strip out your bulkheads, because then that's going to be, even if the bulkheads don't cost that much, time consuming pulling this whole front end apart just because you stripped out a screw. That's a pain that I don't really want to go through. So just be mindful of that when you're putting those screws back in. The other thing I will point out, because I did move these rear shocks down one position, and I want to show you exactly what this means, and that is that I can't put my hand under that wheel, but on this wheel at the front, you can see I can get my fingers under there. So I may move this one down as well, but I'm gonna have to check the angle of everything to make sure that I'm not putting too much strain on these dog bones going into the outdrive cups, because if you do have too much angle, then they start to bind and it can create problems. So I'll be experimenting a little bit, and I'll do that off camera. But that's one thing that I did notice, where I can put my fingers under this wheel and not under the rear, because I moved that down. So yeah, that's probably the only thing to keep in mind when you're doing these upgrades. Now, very quickly, just before we wrap this up, I'll turn this radio on. We'll turn this ESC on, and you can see just how snappy that steering is compared to what it was. So I'm super impressed. This can go even faster and can go even torquier than this if I have an ESC that can go to 8.4 volts. But at 7.4, I think that is plenty. I'm very happy with the speed, and yeah, I can't wait to take this thing out and give it another bash. It's been a while since I've been out to the track. I've been doing a few things in my own personal life and taking care of a few other issues, and I really haven't had time to get out there. So I'm very much looking forward to starting, putting out content, running videos and all sorts of things here on the channel again. So if you are new here, please be sure to subscribe. If you are already subscribed, a big thank you to you. Really do appreciate your support. And of course, I do want to say a big thank you to Draco for sending out all these parts for review and to install on my Truggy. Really do appreciate them supporting the channel. Also, a big thank you to Savox, who also supplied the steering servo for this truck. And I don't have anyone to thank for the Hobby Wing ESC. I think I got that one myself. So, and of course, big thank you to HPI for supplying the truck quite a long time ago. So that's it from me, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. Be sure to hit that like button before you go, and I'll be speaking to you all next time.